Okay, so here we're going to have a look at how we refine the edge of objects that we're cutting out here. Okay, so basically I'm going to hide Stay Puft here. We're going to be working on the helicopter, and I'm just going to show you a few tips and tricks for masking out an object. Okay, now one thing I will do is I'm going to eventually have this on this background layer here, but what I'd like to do in order to be able to see what's going on is to have a layer behind my layer that really contrasts with it. Okay, so I've created a new layer here, and I'm going to go to Edit, Fill, and I'm going to fill this with a color. Okay, so I'm trying to look for a color that contrasts with the orange, the yellow, and these other colors that I'm using in here. So I'm going to pick a nice magenta color and click OK, and that's going to fill that background color. So we can turn this on and off to see how it composites with the foreground layer. But as we work on our mask, this is going to enable us to really see where the edges aren't working, or where we've got any kind of white halos around the edges of our image. Okay, so I'm going to clear the layer mask that I'm currently working with. Okay, so I'm just going to delete this. Okay, and then I'm going to make a new selection. So if we zoom in on our helicopter here, I'm going to zoom right in this time. Okay, really what we're looking to do now is to get a real nice kind of tight line around the edge of this helicopter. Okay, so we're going to use the magnetic lasso tool. Okay, and we're going to come around the edge of our helicopter here, and I can hold down the hand tool so I can keep moving around. Okay. And we have a nice contrast in most areas here between the foreground and the background. So the magnetic lasso tool is going to do a pretty good job of detecting where the edge is. Okay, you can see though it does not always work. And the areas where it normally would struggle would be where we're masking white on white. So in particular here around the rotor blade, you can see there's some areas of low contrast here, and we've got a little jump. Okay, so we'll come back and look at how we fix those. And we'll just speed up here as we continue to go around and finish up our selection. So remember that any mistakes you make, you can come back and adjust them later on. So don't worry about slipping across the line or making incorrect adjustments where the contrast isn't perfect. You can always come back in and edit that. Okay, so we've made our rough selection here. Okay, now before we add the layer mask, we're going to go in and just refine some of the edges. So I'm going to grab the polygonal lasso tool, and I'm going to zoom in here and just look at some of those areas which I need to fix. So when I'm doing this, I'm using the Shift and Alt modifier keys. So just to illustrate roughly, Shift here will add to my selection. Okay, so I've added this area to my selection, and Alt will remove areas from my selection. Okay, now when I'm doing this, what I would normally do, for instance here, is start somewhere away from the edge of the selection. So I want to remove this. So Alt is the option for this one. So I'm going to hold down Alt, but I'm going to click away from my selection so I can then jump to this corner here. Okay, so you want to have control, but you want to kind of build into the work you're actually doing. So I'm making the beginning and end away from my edge so that I can then move into it a little more fluidly. Okay, so I've got a little bit here where it hasn't caught the edge, so I'm going to add down here. Okay, and then I'm going to remove just this little nick in the edge here. Okay, and then up here we've missed the edge of the rotor blade. Your eyes sometimes better than Photoshop. Okay, and I just draw around and then finish off away from that line. Okay, because I can be a bit more rough with my selection, and then double click to close off that one. I can see I've just missed a little bit of edge there, so I'll start away here and then come around there. Okay, and we can keep going around this to refine our selection, and then once we've done that, we'll add the layer mask using the refined selection. Okay, so now that we've refined our selection, we can go ahead and add our layer mask. Okay, and we can now zoom in once we've added the layer mask, and immediately you can see with the pink background, we've missed a big chunk there. So we'll just take a step back, and with the polygonal lasso tool, we'll just fix this last one here. Okay, and that's why the pink background is so nice, because it really does kind of highlight what you've missed. And we'll add the layer mask again, and we've got a pretty good selection there. Okay, so one thing that we'll do now is actually, if we double click on the layer mask, you can see we've got some mask edge refinement options here. So we're going to go to refine mask edge here, and we're just going to turn on smart radius. Okay, which basically is Photoshop looking at the edge, looking at the transition between the foreground and background, and trying to refine that edge. So it will make it a bit smoother. It will do some calculations, and really you want this probably somewhere from 2 to 5 pixels at first. See how it works out, and you can see we're kind of eating away a little bit at the edge there, but overall some of it's starting to look good, and we can come back in and refine some parts of this too. So I'm just going to drop this back to 3. You can see it's keeping a bit more of the edge there. Okay, this will be smoothing out some of the edge. Okay, but also where there's white, where there's less contrast between the foreground and background, we're getting a bit of that creep into the actual image. Okay, so if we've been using a green screen or something like that, we might want to decontaminate the edges of the image. With this image, it's not too bad, and so we can just go ahead with the smart radius set to 2 and then click OK. All right, and we'll just come back in, and now with the brush tool, we just need to kind of fix up some of these edges, and we can use a mixture of the brush tool and the mask tools as well. Okay, so I'm going to grab the brush tool, okay, and I'm painting onto the mask layer here in black and white. So here you can see I want to reveal part of the layer, so I'm painting in white here. And I'm just going to harden up the edge of my brush here for this, okay, and jump up the opacity a bit. So you can see I'm just painting that edge back in. Okay, we'll do the same here. Just rotating my canvas by pressing the R key. What I've often found is that when you're doing this on screen, eventually you won't see the holes, but then when you print things out, you'll see some holes that you didn't know were there. So it's always worthwhile doing a proof of your projects before you print out the final version. Okay, so we're just moving around here, tidying up mainly these rotor blades where there was a lower contrast with the image, with the brush tool using black and white, painting onto the mask layer. So we'll go ahead and finish that up. Okay, and basically once you've done that, we have a pretty good composite onto our final image. Okay, the one area of the image which we haven't worked on yet is this glass area of the image, okay, which doesn't matter too much here because we have a white background, so we can get away with it. But if we bring this down, for instance, in front of the sign here, then we should have some sign flowing through to this part of the image. So the way that we can do that is by working on our mask layer. If we grab the polygonal lasso tool, okay, and we'll just come in here and we're going to basically make this grey on the mask layer, and the grey will mean that you get some of that background colour coming through, but not all of it. Okay, so it will look like a screen. So we'll select this, and then we're going to drop the opacity of our brush so that we're not painting 100%. Okay, so we can see we've got this selected, we've got our layer mask selected. We'll grab the brush tool and then we'll switch the brush tool to, let's say, 20%. We're painting inside this mask layer, so we can paint with quite a big brush. Okay, and we're painting with black. Okay, so it's already white on this layer, so we're painting black in here, and that will just gradually let some of that background layer through. I'm just going to up the opacity of this and make sure I'm painting with black, and then we'll come in here and you can see we're revealing some of that background. So we can moderate this, we can have a little less showing through or a little more, okay? But you can see now that we've begun to composite it into that image a little bit better, so it looks a little more realistic. Okay, so that's how to composite the image in, and then also how to add transparency, so levels of grey into that image mask.